Welcome, IT changemakers, to the DEX Show with Tim Flower and Tom McGraw. Let's get into it.
Hello, changemakers. Welcome to a very special DEX Show. It's a very special DEX Show because Tim and I, every now and then, we are joined by repeat guests, special guests that we're especially excited to invite back. But today we have the first ever combination of a first-time guest and a repeat guest. The repeat guest is Kelly Monahan. Kelly joined us when she was still at Meta to discuss, I believe it was employee experience, Kelly. Is that
Yep.
correct? I think so.
Yeah, good memory. Correct.
That was off the top of my head as well, Kelly. I didn't go looking.
It was an easy guess, Tom, at the answer.
People are going to have.
If you're going to pull a subject, I would probably be the one I would pull.
Yeah. Listen, Tom, I'm not going to correct you on your own podcast. That sounds good.
Not wrong.
Well, and even in the heat,
I wasn't wrong.
The heat, he still got it.
I was not. I think it was about that. Oh, I'm not going to go into it any more.
No, it really was.
Look at the episode. It was a great chat, and I think Kelly also contributed an article for us for the DEX Hub. Welcome back, Kelly. Lovely to see you again. How are you?
You too. Thank you.
Excellent. And also welcoming for the first time, Christie Smith. Hi, Christie. Great to welcome you.
Hi. Well, it's great to be here. I feel like, I'm always a fast follower to Kelly, so this is great.
And maybe start by introducing yourself, first of all, to the listeners then, Christie, since they haven't had the previous pleasure.
Yeah, sure, Tom. It's great to be with you both, actually. So I've spent the majority of my career in consulting, a very long time at Deloitte and then Accenture. I was the first head of I&D at Apple and now author, international speaker, and founder of the Humanity Studio. So it's great to be with you.
Wonderful stuff. And Kelly, welcome back again. What have you been up to since we last spoke? Not at Meta anymore, I believe. I've been following your moves subsequently a little bit.
Yes, I'm a typical millennial. Don't stay put too often. So I'm at Upwork now. I've been there about 18 months. And the reason why I made the move, as you guys know, I've been studying the future of work for over 10 years now. And I got really excited about VR and the metaverse, and I still really am. I'm still using the technology. But I realized if we didn't get our talent models right first, and we didn't understand how to actually use alternative sources of talent, and what Christy and I focus a lot on in our research is around getting that leadership and culture component right, which is why I came to Upwork to start the Upwork Research Institute, so we can focus on that talent, leadership, and culture side, and then give me a few more years and head back to the metaverse.
Excellent. And you just mentioned, yes, so the reason you are here together is you've written a book together. So I guess the best place to start, Kelly, is how have you come to collaborate, and what inspired you to write this particular book?
Yeah, Christy and I met probably almost 10 years ago now when we were both at Deloitte. Christy was a partner, and I've always been on the research side. And I'll be honest with you, Christy was one of those leaders that just stood out in a company that's filled with a lot of really competitive, great leaders, but they lack sometimes the humanity and really coming to get to know someone and taking that time, especially, at the time I was starting my career as more of a junior researcher. And so Christie's style of leadership really stood out to me. And the questions she was asking for us to go research were different than your typical just basic financial P&L type questions that are usually top of mind for CEOs. Christie had that financial acumen, but then also brought the human side. And so, her and I continued to follow each other one way or the other. But I don't know, Christy, who's following who, actually. And we worked together at Accenture much more closely. And, I think what we realized at this point in time, we can continue to talk about the problem, but we really need to start doing something about this. And so leaders, I'm very empathetic. Leaders sometimes get a bad rap when it comes to, we talked about before, with employee experience and really understanding the workforce. But I think what Christy and I recognize is they just need a new playbook. I think there's a lot of well-intended leaders who are just trying to figure this out, and they have a lot right now they're navigating. And so that's why we wanted to work together and collaborate on Essential, is to really provide that new playbook that moves from talking about the problem and much more to action.
And this is the key phrase, human-powered leadership, right?
Yes.
Would you elaborate on maybe the key characteristics of this?
Sure, Christy, this is one of your definitions here. You want to talk a little bit about emotional leadership and human-powered?
Yeah. So, the name of the book, first and foremost, is Essential, how distributed teams, generative AI, and global shifts are creating a new human-powered leader. And in the book, as Kelly said, we are creating a new playbook. And what we do is, is both of our predilection is to do the research to say what's missing in leadership today, and how are all of these forces together really impacting leaders, managers, and employees, and not just those three stakeholders, but your customers and the communities in which those individuals reside and those companies reside. And what we found in our research is that the fundamental question has changed with regards to organizations and leaders. For a millennial, we've been asking as leaders of organizations, what do we require of our employees, right? What are the skills that we need? What are the attitudes? What's that phrase I absolutely hate, cultural fit, that we need within our organizations? And given the last several years since the pandemic, and the pandemic was a big part of this, but certainly social unrest that's gone on, global instability politically that's gone on, economic insecurity that's gone on, all of this has really shifted that question where employees are now asking, hey, wait a second. I know what you're asking me to do, but here's what I require of leadership. And in our research, we found that there are 4 areas that employees are really demanding something different before they join an organization or stay at an organization. Purpose. So, what is that company value? Are they living up to their purpose? Do their insides match their outsides? And given the investigative tools of our younger generations, they are really looking at and deeply examining how companies and leaders are living up to their purpose and values. The second is agency. Employees want the agency to define who they are in their own words. Stop defining me by a set of competencies, by a role, or by my gender, race, sexual orientation. I will define who I am at work, and I will define how, when, and where I want to work. The third is wellness. We know that mental health is the mental health crisis is the new pandemic. And we are seeing an incredible hockey stick rise of mental health issues with regards to employees and employee family members today because of all of the pressures that I talked about earlier. And then finally is connection. How do we create connection in a distributed workplace, but also more, and dare I say the word, intimacy between employees and with their managers and their leaders? All of those 4 pieces really demand a new model of leadership. And we need to move from this old model of leadership of emotional intelligence to the requirement of leaders to be emotionally mature. And that is suspension of self-interest, insatiable curiosity, the creation of culture that is meaningful and purpose-driven, and this notion of being able to see your employees contextually, meaning not just what they're doing at work, but what are they facing, not at work, but at home. Countless people, and Kelly, you can probably expand on this, that we've worked with over the years are, covering some aspect of who they are at work. And in essence, working with one hand tied behind the back. They're getting a divorce. Their child has autism. Their parents are being put in hospice. Their family members in a war zone. Whatever it is, these are occupying employees and leaders alike while they're at work. And if leaders don't and managers don't have the competency to ask questions and understand the contextual competence, or have that contextual competence to understand their employees, well, then they're never going to reach the business goals or the engagement that they need from their employee base.
So Kelly, let me tee it up with a question for you to kind of hone in on that subject. So I follow, as you can imagine, a few thought leaders on social, and there's one that routinely shares written encounters with bad bosses, email, text, And the common theme to all of it, and some of them are just boggles my mind that a manager or leader could respond in some ways, but the common theme is a complete and total lack of empathy for employees. So I'm curious if you can expand a bit on the importance of that characteristic, that empathy and emotional intelligence in our modern leadership.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is probably, we a lot of talk these days about like an existential crisis with AI, and there's certainly some concerns. But the reason why we wrote the book is I think leadership and management is in an existential crisis. Like that's the real here and now. And the thought leader that you're, talking about, I'm sure there's a multitude of examples that they're being able to pull. And so Gallup has done a lot of research in this space too. We know people leave their positions not because necessarily of work or environment, but much more around their direct relationship with their manager. So my big question as a researcher is like, how do we end up here? The reality is, like, and most people don't realize this who have an MBA or have gone through any formal management training, we start with the assumption that people don't want to work. 1970s agency theory came out, and that's why we started MBA programs, was because we were concerned that people were not going to act in the best interest of the organization. Now, in all of the research I've done, I have found in general, there's been no more of 10% of the entire population that doesn't want to contribute to some degree. The bad actors or nefarious activity that everyone's so concerned about is really on the peripheral and not the mainstream. And so I think we got to, like, for managers, we've got to flip this question upside in our head and ask, do you trust your people? If you start with the assumption that most people want to work, they want to, as Christy mentioned, have purpose, make a contribution, have connection, that occurs in our workplace today. I mean, that is where the majority of people's identity comes from. And so as a manager, if you start with that assumption and think through, how do I facilitate the environment conditions that I can bring out the best of my people? I think so often middle managers and leaders start opposite by thinking, I know people don't want to be here. How do I begin to make sure that they're, at the end of the day, I'm managing up top. I want to make sure I look good. How do I get people to do that? And instead, if they let that go and trust their people, I think they're going to be surprised by how well they'll actually end up looking, because people will end up doing better than most of the times we set as expectations.
And Christy, I love that concept you threw out, the suspension of self-interest. It struck me, and again, I'll put it kind of in the form of a question. Anyone that's been in any kind of people leadership for any amount of time, and as Tom likes to point out, I've got nearly a 100-year career in corporate world. You've certainly either read about or listened to people talk about the difference between management and leadership. Right? We could probably talk for an hour about those two contrasting ideas. But certainly in pandemic and remote work, things have certainly changed for managers. But in your opinion, what's the most significant global shift impacting leadership today? How those shifts in how we lead influence the organizations and how they operate?
Yeah, I think it is the combination of the things that I talked about earlier, is that most leaders, and I dare say managers, are no longer just the fiduciary or the product owners of their organizations. They're global citizens.
Hmm.
And they are having to grapple with the onslaught of these combined issues that I talked about earlier: AI, technology, um, global crises around the world, supply chain crises around the world that still are impacting us, health conditions around the world, all of that. And they're having to do that and maintain, a focus on outcomes and productivity, right? That is a very difficult balance. And if you think about the combination of all of those things, I mean, just think about, I'll think about my day, right? My day is stacked, appointment after appointment after appointment
Mm-hmm.
after appointment. And I've got a team globally, right? How leaders choose to make time in their calendar to actually engage with their employees, it's a simple thing to say, a really hard thing to execute. So I think the greatest challenge for leaders today is the mindset shift of, I'm not just a servant leader. I'm not just an emotionally intelligent leader. We've got to move beyond that because the conditions of the world demand it, to be truly a leader who suspends self-interest for the greater purpose of the people. Now, we've seen an incredible demonstration of that and demonstrations of it in the last couple of weeks, right?
Right.
And so how do we think about, as leaders, giving up, if you will, the political landscape that you find yourself in, right? Playing politics at work is the biggest issue of dissatisfaction for leaders, managers, and for employees. Now, a certain amount of it, you got to learn how to play. It's a business acumen issue. But what is critical is to step back and say, well, I could play this game or I could suspend my self interest in order to get to know every member of my team deeply, so I know what motivates them. I know what their creativity, their innovation, how they think, and how do I compose that team to me not to be not just high performing, but Olympic level
Mm.
performance on my team. And you can't do that if you are back to back and if you are thinking about your own political situation in the organization or your own creation of wealth or the attainment of another position in the organization.
Shout out, great connection to current events with the Olympic level. That's awesome.
You know what? Clever like that.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's safe to say that employees today, and maybe in the realm of knowledge workers, office workers, interact with their digital world more than their human world, right? They're working with applications, they're working with data, they're working with anything that's on the screen at the time. And even when they interact with their manager slash leader, there's a digital tool in between them, Zoom, Teams, whatever it might be. So let's tie it back to that digital experience of employees. How does the concept of a human powered leadership relate to the concept of that digital employee experience?
Yeah, I can start, and then Christy, let me know if you have any thoughts. So I think, one of the things that I think we have to get right with technology, as Christy alluded to, I think so often leaders turn to this as a productivity tool and efficiency. And I think one of the things that I was really impressed with when I was at Meta was building technologies to create social presence and connection. So I don't think these have to be an either or. I think it's really in the design of how we think about utilizing these technologies, the way that we approach them. And I think so often we allow them to be a barrier when in reality, I mean, I led a team when I was at Accenture. It's probably one of the most connected teams I've ever been a part of, and we've never met in person. But as Christy mentioned, it was a lot more time as a leader of making sure that I was carving out this space, that there was video, on. I, really believe in open calendars when you're working in a remote environment. There should be no, full visibility of what's happening. If I'm going to go to an Orange Theory class, that's okay. I'm going to put that on my calendar and have that conversation. I think oftentimes we can either use these tools to further transparency and really bring that physical presence in a digital environment, or we can use them as barriers. And again, use that as a way to keep knowledge closer to ourselves, turn off the video, and really minimize that human connection. So I really think it's all in how we're approaching this. And that's what the book talks about. If we do this in a human powered way, we're using these two tools to connect human to human. And just an area of opportunity to do that.
And Christy, what are your thoughts about
Yeah.
using digital tools to foster that engaging, supportive work environment?
Yeah, I look at this in three ways. One is, how do you use digital and AI to understand your workforce better,
Mm-hmm.
right? The data that we get through a Teams or through a Zoom or through, many applications about how teams and the workforce is feeling, their sentiment, we can collect that, not just in a 1-year employee experience survey. I mean, I
Right.
honestly, companies that are continuing to do that 1 year, I think are really, really missing the boat. I mean, I just read,
The pulse survey, right? They
yeah,
send
the
out a
pulse
pulse survey.
survey.
Well,
It's
what
crazy.
is that? I have a one heartbeat a year. What?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly my point. I just read in the Harvard Business Review that that like 90% of employees think that their employers don't take action on the
Right.
employee experience. So it's really, let's give that up and start thinking about, how do we use technology to understand how our workforce is feeling on a daily basis, right? So, and be really communicative and transparent as to how, when, and why you're doing this, that you're not looking at individuals, but you're looking at the collective. I think AI does that. That's number one. Number two is, how do you gain as a leader or manager time to free up, like we've just been talking about,
Mm,
through the efficiencies of AI and technology? Really looking at where, giving up the notion that you've got to be back to back and you do the people stuff at night, or on the weekends. So how can you free up your calendars by being more efficient using technologies? And the third area is, leaders themselves need to learn these new rules of engagement. They need to learn exactly the blueprint that we talk about in the book, that mindset of suspension of self-interest. Most importantly, insatiable curiosity. What does it mean to be curious about your employees, and to be able to put your cell phone away, turn off your computer, turn off your, digital watch, whatever it is, and engage in a 20-minute conversation with your employees, starting with, this isn't rocket science, starting with, how are you?
right.
What are you working on? That we think that being curious as managers is taboo with our employees. And I hear this all the time. Well, how do I do that, Christy? Well, how do you do it when you're standing next to somebody at your kid's soccer game? It's the exact same thing. So those are the three areas: how you use digital AI, and AI, to engage employee sentiment. How do you gain productivity? And leaders needing to learn the new rules of engagement.
Good stuff.
So many questions answered already in this fascinating conversation. Um, I mean, talk about the AI tooling with any more specificity if you can, because it's absolutely fascinating, the idea of integrating that human with the artificial. It's a fascinating theme, and I wonder if you could unpack a little bit more how you envisage those could come together. First of all,
Kelly, you want to start, or you want me to?
You go ahead, and then I'll
Okay,
follow up
I'll
with some
start. You
research.
you you follow.
Perfect.
So I think that there are, if you look at tools like Microsoft Teams, or you look at a collaborative tool like a Mural, or you look at even Zoom, right? Um, each of those has the capability to not only capture the conversation, so you can get a transcript from that. And if you, as a manager, really look at that transcript, you can begin to determine who's the loudest voice, who's not talking, what are the ideas actually that are coming up that just got muted, right? You can now do the forensics on a meeting that allows you to go back to a team member and say, hey, tell me a little bit more about that idea, or you were quiet on this point. Any input, because as we're building this out, I need everybody's input. Though that kind of tool and accessibility to that kind of AI transcript and tool is enormous in
Mm,
terms of building connection. The second is, as we move into areas of not only large language models, but large action models, these companies are going to very soon be able to identify behavioral cues through the camera that give us a sense for engagement, give us a sense for distraction, give us just a mood sense of how your employees are feeling, right? Or at least testing that. And so the notion of large, let me give you a really good example. Apple has come out with Apple Vision. Well, part of what Apple is trying to get from Apple Vision is, what are your eye movements? And then what decisions are you making as a result of that? What are you clicking on? What are you going to? How distracted are you? All of that data really tells us a lot about how an individual is managing their day. So these kinds of capabilities that these tools are advancing and collaborative tools are, giving us an insight to human behavior around, is not shouldn't be looked at as big brother, but should be looked at as a leadership and management tool to help us better understand and engage our employees.
And they can be used for good or evil. Tom, real quick comment, and then I'll throw it back to you. Chrissy, you made that point about the note take, the AI taking notes in a meeting. Even in our conversation today, I can be far more engaged with both of you without having to take notes. If I'm on my
Right.
keyboard taking notes or writing things down, I'm
Great
thinking about
point.
what you just said versus what I want to say next or what you're going to say. I can be far more engaged if I don't have to worry about any of that and
Yeah.
read it later. I think it's a great use of the tool.
If I could offer a counterpoint, do you feel maybe, Christy, that level of digital scrutiny, particularly as so much of our work is remote, could become inordinate or could become a deterring factor in people's engagement? Like if you're feeling that you describe a situation, you just the facility you have in mind for this technology is very impressive, very imaginative, and very striking. But at the same time, it requires a level of recorded scrutiny, both of our visual cues and of everything that's said, which I think which could also feel intrusive. I mean, how would you square that circle or balance that in your view?
Yeah, this is where I think transparency and communication become really important, how you roll these tools out, right? So, how an organization positions itself to use this technology to better engage people in the organization with one another and on the tasks at hand, I think you got to communicate that really well. I think the second thing is I think more than anything, and our research bears this out in the book, is what people want is to be seen, heard, and valued. That is a basic human need, and I think is at a level today that is when they're not feeling those things, creating anxiety, creating depression, and making people feel invisible at work. So I think the notion of these tools helping us better see our employee base, hear people, in an equitable way, right? Not just the loudest voice wins or, the old boys club wins, those kinds of things. These things can be used to dismantle that. But it is all the requirement is how leaders lead around that to create trust, how we create transparency toward trust of how these tools will be used for good and never be necessarily used to as a performance tool.
Yeah.
That's the key. Communication is everything, right? You can't come out with a new corporate policy that all Teams calls require video on because we have to watch your eyeballs, right?
Yeah.
It's how you position things has to be done for good and there's got to be a level of trust there too, right? You got to establish that trust, but it's the way you position things is critical.
Yeah.
Fascinating. And Kelly, I have a feeling Tim and I may have cut you off there to adding to that incredibly interesting answer.
Yeah, no, I think it's such an interesting conversation because, I think one of my fears is as we continue to roll out these projects, and I completely agree with Christy on the power of the intelligence we're going to have. But my concern is, especially spending some time in tech, is that the way that we're approaching these technology and tools is from like a very extroverted, driven, straight white male approach. And so that's what makes me nervous is
Yep.
I'm introverted. So, am I going to come up, maybe I'm fully engaged, but I might be quiet or my visual cues may not mimic someone that this model has been trained on. So that's probably just like my watch out that we're thinking about too, as we continue to develop artificial intelligence at Upwork is how do we think about accessibility concerns? Remote work has been very beneficial to minority communities, to disabled communities. And I think we just have to recognize how do we incorporate these technologies where we've done so much service to some of these communities and creating inclusive environments. And I think again, like, as we go through the book, this is why that contextual competency that Christy was talking about before becomes so critical as a leader is you have to understand the context in which your employees are operating. You can't be treating everyone the same. And so that's just my watch out. I think as these tools roll out, let's just be careful and really understand who they're being modeled after, what we're actually subscribing as success within an organization, I've done a lot of research that, what we even define as success tends to, again, gravitate towards that very type A, ambitious, extroverted personality. And I'm not sure that's what the world, I think we need more diversity in what success looks like within an organization. So that's just some of my feedback.
Yeah, Kelly, this is why I love working with you and why I love researching and writing with you. It's such an important point. I will say that, as a leader begins to learn how to be emotionally intelligent, insatiably curious, and build kind of their own behavior to build a culture where the tools can help, but hopefully it becomes part of something that is innate to them, is to reach out. And, listen, I've worked on teams for nearly 40 years. I mean, I know that I know who the loudest voice is. I know who I'm always going to get an answer from, right? And is going to answer every question or have a comment on everything that's discussed in a meeting. I know enough in my career to say, okay, great, we've heard from you. I want to hear from, XYZ. What are you thinking? And if you're not prepared to give me a thought now, let's talk about it afterwards, because I'm not going to make any decisions in this room without actually everybody's voice.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to chip in and say I can really see why you two enjoy working together. Also, every question we get two sides of the answer. It's wonderful. And and to that end, I'm not going to stop addressing either of you with specific questions. I'm going to be interested in both of your responses. So I'd like to hone in on the question of balancing talent and technology. And I think I'm going to add my own caveat to this question, which is how do you conceptualize what talent is in an era when technology is consuming so much of our skill sets? What is left over that's distinct to the individual employee in either of your views?
Christy, I can start with this one because I can share some data that we have. So at Upwork, one of the reasons why I came to is we have an internal labor market. So I'm looking every day in real time on what clients are searching for, what freelancers are listing as skills profiles, and where the hiring is occurring. So no surprise, for the last 18 months, we've been laser focused on how is generative AI in particular and machine learning disrupting our labor markets, what people actually need, and to your point, how much of the skills for humans are either going away, being substituted, and then what are the new categories of work emerging. And the picture is very clear, and I think it's, anyone who's been studying technology for the last 20, 30 years, we're seeing a skills bias technology change. And so if you're working on routine, what we define as low value work, which is just monetary, a project that's worth 250 to 500 on our platform, we're seeing a lot of disruption for that type of human skill set because AI is able to make people work much faster, more efficiently. And so that is, I think, just something that we're going to continue to see as the models get smarter, as we start having more reliability in the outputs that they're producing. But then on the flip side, what we're seeing across all categories of work are high value projects. So work that requires complexity, strategic thinking, relationship management, really taking on more as a project scope, and or getting much deeper with the technology and really being able to build alongside of it. Those are now earning a premium on our platform. I mean, those same workers are now earning anywhere between 8 to 13% more per, whether it's per hour or fixed project. So I think the lesson here is that, to your point, skills are just being disrupted. And what was working just a few years ago, even if you were a coder, everyone's getting, go be a coder, get into STEM. That's actually one of the most disrupted categories we're seeing. And so coders are having to shift and figure out what are they doing as AI enables them to code more efficiently. And so I think there's two calls of action, the way that I see it. And the data is, the very first is, if you're in business or you're staying in professional knowledge work, you have to move up the skills chain. Like, there is that low value routine work. And if we're going to be honest, like David Graeber wrote this book, Bullshit Jobs. A lot of it is just like the administrative bullshit work that like we don't really want to do as humans and we're not equipped to do. And then my second thing is, and Kristen, I talk about this in the book too, is I think one of the areas we're not talking enough about is the apprentice in trades. As we look at the jobs reports every month, the reason why we have an imbalanced labor market is there's more demand in healthcare, government services, construction, and maybe the tech and technology and talent combination over there as well. So if you're staying in business, you've got to move up the value chain, and also don't be afraid to look outside of areas that are quite frankly undervalued today in society. But Christy, curious to get your thoughts.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. And I think that the way that we talk about this in the book is in two ways. One is, this creation of a third category of worker. We talk about white collar workers, blue collar workers, but today, given the influx of the kind of technology that we have, there is a gray category of workers. And it's that overlap, whether it's the blue collar or white collar, and how technology is forcing new competencies in both areas, right? And how we as employees and as a society need to really look at what is that gray workers category and what is required for us to upskill, reskill, and engage those populations. The second way that we talk about this is in the complementary competencies of human and artificial intelligence, right? So you have human intelligence that is truly something that we possess because, listen, AI is backwards looking. Human intelligence is now, can be contextual, and is forward looking, right? And forecasting. The ability to listen and to observe and to take action, the ability to build a hypothesis and experience driven kind of experiment is unique to us. Purpose and values, unique to human intelligence. On the other side, you've got, again, artificial intelligence, the past orientation, the linear thinking, identifying really the dominant discourse, which is what, Kelly was talking about earlier, and how AI is being established by primarily a single demographic. It's algorithm dependent, right? The combination of human intelligence and AI really gives us a new set of competencies that all sets of workers need, which is that decision making and strategy development, governance. How do we think about governing AI and machine learning? How do we think about contextual risks that apply in management and security? These things will need to be requirements of any organization or any employee base.
Question then for you both. Trends, upcoming trends that leaders should be aware of that they might not already have at the top of mind. What stands out to you? Maybe start with Christie.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of things. I think let's be realistic about the trends that leaders aren't accepting today, and that is a distributed workplace. The reality is, yes, we can demand people come back to work. Some industries, some parts of a company, that may be a requirement. And for some, there's no other choice because they're working frontline or on oil rigs and all of that. So what leaders need to do to really hone their own development and skills and communication and all of it, and trust with employees, is how do I manage a distributed workplace, because it's not going away. The second is the trend of this question that I started with. Employees will make decisions now based on what they require of leaderships and organizations. The fastest growing part of our economy today is the gig economy. And that is resulting from largely women and people of color leaving the workforce to start their own, whether it's startups or be freelancers, whatever it is. So this notion of, employers and leaders need to get their heads wrapped around the fact that this is bi-directional now, these questions of requirement, not a one-way street. The third area is that's not going to change is technology and the advances of technology. We have just scratched the surface of large action models. We've just scratched the surface of AI in biotech. These are going to have dramatic impacts on our humanity, period. And so being able to really develop those skills and capabilities in addition to large language models is critical. Today, what we know from research is nearly 100% of all leaders that we've talked to, CEOs, C-suite, say they know they need to do something differently with the adoption of technology and their organizational structures. Yet only 23% are even thinking of doing something, So the percentage is so much smaller of those who are actually doing something. So, I'd love to say, Tom, hey, these are the future trends. The reality is we're not going to have a future if leaders don't address these very significant issues today that they're not willing to lean into.
Fair point. Kelly?
Yeah. Thank you, Christy. So I'll give the listeners a few other things to keep top of mind. So we've talked about it a little bit, but I do think these are the labor markets are unusual. We haven't seen these in the last 30 years where we do have demand exceed supply. And we've already talked a little bit about where some of the imbalance is. So, I mean, I do think if we continue to think about unit of a job in order to attract and retain talent, we're going to have a severe shortage on our hands. However, we begin to think, and as Christy teed up, new business starts in 2023 reached a record high in the US. And so there's more people opting out of that traditional employment model. And so I think one of the trends that leaders need to be thinking about is how do we actually move from a job design and these really like old school models that we've inherited since the 1920s into what does a fluid talent arrangement look like? Like, am I going to be okay managing a team that might work for me and then also might work for another organization part of the time? Like, that is the mindset shift that I think needs to take place, because part of this labor imbalance and skill shortage and talent shortage is self-inflicted. It's by the way that we organize work today. And that's something that I think needs to be disrupted. So again, there's a lot of lip service giving to skills-based hiring, but I think that's something that we need to start really focusing on in order to get this right. And then the second trend I'll just talk about, just because surprised that you haven't come up yet, is Gen Z. So millennials, I think, started to ask for different things within the workforce, but Gen Z is really coming in as a true first digital native generation. And really, like, they're having a slow start. So they are part of the reason why we also have a labor shortage is Gen Z is slower to enter into the full-time workforce right now. And that is because of TikTok videos and all these other things that are going around showing how broken the corporate culture and system is. And so they're looking to opt out or figure out a new way. And they're doing so on the baby boomers' wealth that has been accumulated. And so we're at this really interesting time period where the next generation coming into the workforce is asking for something completely different. And so we are seeing the social contract shift. And I think it's going to be interesting. What does Gen Z want to do, with their technology and their capabilities? And what we saw for the first time in Business Insider, Aki Odo just wrote this report that for the first time, we're seeing Gen Z actually want to go work in jobs that are more meaningful and filled with purpose, and gravitating towards St. Jude Hospital as one of the top ones, and really upending the tech companies for the first time. So I have optimism in the next generation that they do want to work differently, and that they may be looking into areas of work that are actually going to do more collective good. Because as Christy said, we won't end up having a future to even think about if we don't start getting people healthy, start focusing on the climate, and start making sure the distribution of wealth is more evenly distributed.
I honestly thought you were going to say they're on TikTok too much.
I refuse. I can't. Everyone's making TikTok videos. I won't do them.
A much more nuanced and insightful answer than my brain anticipated.
Totally would.
Right, so,
Totally with you, Kelly.
honestly, just an absolutely fascinating discussion. Loved it. So interesting. Tim, anything you have left to chip in with or ask, because I feel so stimulated by this myself.
I think we explored a lot. I love kind of the blend of people and technology. We kind of tend to fall entirely on one side or the other. We'll have an entire episode just on AI or just on leadership. I love the way that you guys connect the dots and make sure that we're thinking about both sides of the equation. So really appreciate it today.
And you do have a joint website, which we will direct people to in the show notes who want to follow up and, as it says here, pre-order the book. Just a real joy. Thank you both so much.
Well, thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
It was super fun.
To make sure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to leave a rating of the show. Just tap the number of stars you think the podcast deserves. If you'd like to learn more about how NextThink can help you improve your digital employee experience, head over to nextthink.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.